Well, it's noon and almost a minute, so let's begin. Welcome. Welcome to our third webinar as a follow-up to the Michigan Mass Timber Summit.
Sorry, Brian, I apologize. Can you please share your screen?
I can. I was going to talk for just a moment and then do that because as soon as I share it, I got to go to full screen.
Okay, because in the video, it's going to have all these pictures and everything while you're talking.
Okay, well then I will share my screen. Just a moment, please. As I take on a different technologist role here. Do you have the PowerPoint now?
Yes, you're good to go.
All right. Well, welcome to this webinar. Starting with a few technical things, which is all part of our world that we live in these days. So that just a few webinar logistics. I'd like to ask you to please mute your own microphones, turn off your webcams, and both these things are particularly between now and Q&A. There'll be an opportunity later to turn back on. And please submit questions in the chat function. And we will then, my job as host will be to bring those questions forward. I'm Brian Craig. I'm an architect and a longtime mass timber advocate in person and chair of the board of the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute. Julie Manley, also from our board, vice chair, is also joining us today and is the person who's actually making these things happen. So with thanks to Julie. MIFB, the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute, is really all about greening Michigan's economy and to enhance the quality of our lives. And we see our role as conveners. We bring together industry and academia and folks like all of us on this call to advance the ideas and the thought and the content of the work of our Michigan forest bioeconomy. We were established as a nonprofit corporation, first under the wing of Michigan Technological University, and their former dean and founder of MIFB is on this call as well today, Terry Sherrick. Now we're all volunteer, we're independent, and the work we do is done out of service to the state. So joining us today is Pete Covelt. Because of the technological circumstances that just happened, I do not have his biography in front of me anymore. So I just know from reading it and commending to you. And Pete, if you want to add anything to your biography, please feel free to do so. Pete's a longtime advocate of mass timber with deep expertise in the technology, in the product, in the fabrication, in the manufacturing of mass timber, and a tremendous resource to have here today. And he comes to us as part of Element 5, who is a single source provider, designer, builder, fabricator of mass timber products and projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete to talk about advancing mass timber education, design, engineering, development, and construction in Michigan. And we will have a backwards remote control. I will change the slides when Pete tells me to. So Pete, it's on to you.
Thanks, Brian. Just confirming everyone hears me loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay. I've never been accused of being a low talker, so we should be okay. Thanks, Brian. Great intro. Thanks, Julie, for organizing this particular event. Great to see great attendance. And, you know, I always like to just tell people that I'm always available as a resource. I know we got a lot of different stakeholders on this webinar today, which is great because it's part of my theme is that it really takes a lot of different stakeholders to come together to drive this industry. And what I'm going to do today is tell you a little bit about me so you understand why you're investing 40 minutes of your time with me and what I think are the necessary components to keep driving and advancing mass timber. And so it's going to cover what you see there, history all the way through construction. Slide, please, Brian. So I'm a Swiss citizen. I'm very fortunate to have had dual citizenship, and as usual, the Europeans are a good 30 years ahead of us on much of this industry. But I turned that into an advantage by investing a lot of time in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, which is really the epicenter of the advent of mass timber, and learning how we could commercialize this vibrant, healthy, growing industry, how we could do that in North America. Slide, please. I literally crawled around the bowels of sawmills and CLT plants and
Pete, you're actually
okay,
on mute.
Yeah, someone muted me. I didn't touch anything, I promise. I'm back.
That was a bad host move.
Okay. I literally have crawled around most of these facilities. What you're looking at here, believe it or not, is a highly advanced Austrian sawmill in the Zillertal Valley that has a movie theater, a gift shop, a conference center, hotel suites, a bar, and a restaurant. For anyone who's been in a North American sawmill, and I'm a huge fan of North American sawmills, but it's a very distinct difference, and it's that vertical integration that these mills have with their engineered wood product manufacturing facilities that is a distinct difference. And you know, it all starts with the fiber. Slide, please. Let's just go to the next one. So you should be on the SmartLam. So just to finish up my bio, I've been fortunate enough to help start 3 North American CLT and glulam manufacturing facilities, starting with the first one in the US in Montana, SmartLam. Slide. Following that with several years at Katerra, who had pretty profound objectives to fundamentally shift the entire construction industry more to off-site. And if you're going to embrace that, then mass timber component manufacturing is a big piece of that. Slide, please. And then more recently, I'm a full-time consultant, not an employee of Element 5, which is a very, very strategically located manufacturing facility in St. Thomas, Ontario, which now gives a very robust supply chain to a historically very underserved region. So upper Midwest, Northeast, Metro New York, Boston, and Mid-Atlantic. And so we are seeing a dramatic proliferation of projects throughout the region, including 2 of the biggest ones in the United States, in Cleveland and Milwaukee. I just finished the Fastenal headquarters office here in Minnesota. And obviously, we've got some projects coming to Michigan, which I'll get to here in a minute. Slide, please. We should be on the library storage at University of Arkansas, just because I'm following along here, obviously. So before we had a robust manufacturing base in North America, we relied on our European colleagues to import projects, and we were very fortunate to have that system culminate with some very dramatic campus projects at the University of Arkansas, including this library storage building. Slide, please, which in turn spawned the Adohi Stadium Drive student residential dormitory, largest of its kind in the country, 5 stories, 200,000 square feet, 700 beds. And we imported both of these projects from Austria, which was no small feat. Slide, please. should be on number 10. The campus project spawned Walmart, where myself and a couple of my colleagues invested about a year educating Walmart on primarily three things: sharing our knowledge of mass timber, helping them reimagine their entire home office campus in Bentonville in timber. They had already been down the path of sort of a conventional approach, and they were very inspired by our work at the university. And we reimagined the entire campus in timber, which was pretty extraordinary. So much so that in doing our research there, we reinforced and amplified the notion that campus type projects, whether it's university or corporate, are probably the most effective and efficient means of really advancing the whole industry. And as you saw, as we've seen in Michigan, the STEM building at Michigan State, university campuses, higher ed, K-12 are really fertile ground for mass timber projects because all of the attributes of the system really resonate with the stakeholders. It's not just cost, apples to apples comparison on conventional structural systems. It's the whole story: the carbon, the sustainability, the durability, the speed, the reduced risk, the fire performance, the health and wellness, the biophilia. And in Walmart's case, we pulled off an extraordinary feat, recognizing that the state has 19 million acres of trees that grow 71 tons of wood fiber every 60 seconds. And I was not able to capture that soundbite from Michigan, but I promise I will follow up and get you that, because I know that that's part of this discussion. And so with an approximate volume of 40,000 cubic meters of material required for this job, they said, could we conceivably lure manufacturing to the state? And I said, yes, we could conceivably do it. And we were successful in that endeavor, as well as Structurlam has invested $90 million in partnership with Walmart, if you can believe it, in the erection of this state-of-the-art facility in Conway, Arkansas. So the entire Walmart campus in Bentonville, Arkansas, will be manufactured using southern yellow pine from the southern reaches of the state of Arkansas. It's a pretty extraordinary story. And it's one that, likely can be duplicated in other states. It's just have to do the wood basket study. Okay, slide. Education. So another prong of how we advance the industry. Woodworks is a tremendous technical resource for mass timber projects throughout the country. They've got about 14 technical regional representatives around the country. Their job for free for you all stakeholders is to help you bring your project to fruition, help you grapple with code, help you understand code, help you get up to speed on code. Code, as you might imagine, is a very dynamic topic, and it's very different everywhere we go. The projects we did in Michigan are doing in Michigan, I should say, are, I believe, still under 2015 code. So there's a lot of important early proactive conversations that need to take place with the AHJ, the authorities having jurisdiction, so that you understand from early on where are the potential apprehensions, where are the opportunities, what are the building types that are going to make the most sense, or the construction types for the buildings that are going to make the most sense. And Woodworks is a tremendous resource in doing this. There's also been on the left here a recent publication, which was fortunately made open source and free. It's the 2020 State of the Industry North American Mass Timber Report. It's really well done. It's really thorough, and it's very comprehensive. And I would encourage everyone to download that and give it a good read. It doesn't get into the weeds too much, but it's a fantastic overview and very insightful and very educational. And I suspect they'll be updating it, every couple of years. Okay, slide. Should be on the graph. What else do we need to drive the industry? Well, we need production. And this is an illustration of, I'm using a European illustration because it's a more mature market, and we can see a much longer period of growth, and then obviously rather dramatic growth. What we would say over here in Minnesota and Michigan is almost a hockey stick profile to this curve, culminating at 2018 at that red 1 million represents 1 million cubic meters of CLT production. And there's 424 board feet in cubic meters, so you can do the math. I'm speculating that today that number is probably approaching 2 million already, just in the short window from 2018 to 2021. So we need production, and we've got about 6 facilities plus a couple Canadian facilities in North America. So we're getting there. Slide, please. One of the things that has really driven the success in Europe and is starting to happen here is the working closely with research-based universities, and of course, getting projects built on university campuses, because they get such notoriety, and they oftentimes afford us the opportunity to develop not only research, R&D, but also develop curriculum. So at the University of Arkansas, we were very mindful of including the student body in architecture, construction, and engineering groups to help develop curriculum, so that we're training the next generation of architects, engineers, and builders in mass timber, so they come out of the chutes and there's not a steep learning curve as we're experiencing right now with how do you do mass timber building. So important for the universities. I trust Michigan State as following that path, but working hand in hand with the universities is really important. Slide, please, number 14. We also need help, right? So years ago, we approached, having met with the Forest Service and learning about the state of the federal forests in the United States, which is not a pretty picture. We went to the USDA and said, listen, we think this story is good for everyone. And so years ago, there was a mass timber design competition funded by the USDA. The same secretary, Tom Vilsack, is now back for a second appearance at the USDA, and they've jumped right back in where they left off with helping sponsor wood product development, wood energy markets, community forests, and so on. And that's worth delving into too on your own, doing the research, seeing where the money went, and seeing what existing opportunities there are still out there. Slide, please. We also need to develop tools, and this again goes hand in hand. You can see the TU Graz. TU Graz is the technical university in Austria that's driving a lot of this development. But we need tools, we need software, we need advanced BIM modeling, programs like WUFI that do energy modeling to help us understand how to build better buildings that use less energy. If we're going to use mass timber, we should be mindful of the fact that the cheapest energy we have is the energy we don't use. So with mass timber, we have fundamental opportunities to build better buildings that use less energy and add more points to our overall score, our overall climate scorecard. Slide, please. We also need to keep pushing the envelope. Mass timber is most compelling when it's taller and competing with inherently more costly materials like concrete and steel. We're also seeing, the understanding of extraordinarily high embodied energy costs of manufacturing concrete and steel. So we need to keep pushing taller. Slide, please. One quick update on that note is California recently has adopted or has agreed to propose the changes already to the 2021 code, which would allow us to go 12 stories now without the encapsulation penalty, where we have to encapsulate when we get up above 85 feet. Certain percentages have to begin to become encapsulated, and it sort of defeats the whole purpose. We need, let's see, I'm on 17. Sorry, I've lost track of myself. Vertical expansion, huge opportunities. This is the first of its kind in DC. So we need to keep innovating. Slide, please. We need to keep pushing campus projects. Slide, please. Okay, here we are in Michigan, the Detroit Head House, right in downtown Detroit. Pioneering project, 35,000 square feet, type 3B, which kept our fire rating to 1 hour. We've been working very closely with the design and ownership and construction teams. That's a theme you will hear over and over and over again. The front end design and development of these projects is a highly collaborative endeavor, and it's really important to work closely with the supplier, the vendor, on optimizing for the efficiencies of mass timber and particularly a certain vendors, special specifications. You'll get way more value engineering working closely with a vendor on an early selection of a design assist. It doesn't mean you can't go back out for pricing, but you will leverage the efficiencies and optimization of that vendor far more than trying to get a bunch of them to compete with each other and working on 3 different designs with 3 different products. It's exhausting. So an early design assist selection is really important. That, I believe, in Michigan, we're working off of 2015. We have this additional up in Newbury. I'm sure most of the stakeholders on this call are aware of it. We're not really allowed to say too much about it, nor are we supposed to about the head house, but they're kind of out there. So the DNR is a great example of a building that can showcase a state's timber and forestry resources in an experiential center. So there's a real conscious effort to integrate as much local timber resources into this as possible. We even dabbled with doing the research on shipping some SPF from Michigan over to Element 5 because we're not too far away, and using the fiber to actually process the CLT, which I think would be an incredibly exciting endeavor and may help advance some of the items on the agenda for Michigan. Slide, please. Again, turning back to Europe, one of the things I learned on my most recent trip was that a significant volume of mass timber components are not going directly into big projects. They're going directly to value-added resellers who are furthering the prefabrication and oftentimes doing modular and volumetric modular. And this was a real eye-opener. Obviously, this slide, we could be sitting anywhere in Michigan in the middle of the winter in a CLT structure that's built to passive house standards. So I think there's a huge opportunity for states like Michigan where products like this will be in demand and could be developed further into workforce housing, hospitality, student housing, all sorts of different channels of housing, in addition to the demand for these accessory dwelling units that are so popular. And that's another way to help drive the industry forward, is understand that if we're going to embrace prefabrication, let's not stop there. Let's keep going and add value to it and come up with more turnkey solutions. Slide, please. Another avenue for mass timber is trying to address the crisis in affordable housing in North America. And it doesn't matter what state you're in, we all have the same problem. And this is sort of a combination of prefab, modular, trying to address the affordable crisis. And really the only way you do it is with prefabrication and modular and really smart designs that are really replicable over and over again. So that's a big avenue to push mass timber is leveraging its capabilities in prefab and modular to drive the market, because we could put this affordable housing unit down in every suburb and every city around the country very quickly. Just pull it off the shelf, respond to the site conditions, and clad it accordingly. Slide, please. So carbon is a big topic, right? The tech companies are really driving the market for data centers and offices that are using timber and reducing their carbon footprint very dramatically. Well, they're not going to get there just by changing the materials of their buildings. Their climate scorecards are, mind-bogglingly huge and aggressive and urgent and long-term and retroactive. So we're seeing the emergence of some really fascinating carbon marketplace and carbon credits. And I just went through a presentation with Aureus Earth here. I would encourage you to look them up. Essentially, Microsoft could come through this marketplace to a guy like me who's got a developer that needs a little kicker in cash because he wants to do mass timber, and Microsoft would pay him to get a carbon credit that they get to use against their carbon scorecard, and report card, and the developer gets the cash, and it goes through this marketplace. So I think this is going to be a really fascinating marketplace to watch develop. This was started by a few of my Katerra alumni. Slide, please.
So Pete, with apologies, the deck I was using ended with the housing. I'm gonna stop sharing and see if I can.
It's
find-
okay. I'm on the last slide, which is it's the follow-up to the Woodworks map. Just encouraging everyone to revisit the Woodworks website. They have a new interactive map that ironically looks like a COVID map because the proliferation of mass timber buildings on the United States is it's almost covering the entire country. And so I was closing with that, and then my contact info at the very end. So don't sweat it. I'm trying to keep it tight. How are we doing on time? And are there questions queuing up? Because I can't see that.
We are doing incredibly efficiently on time, and we have plenty of time for questions. I'm looking now at the chat column where questions would appear, and there aren't any yet. So I'll ask a question if that's okay.
Sure.
You know, you mentioned earlier. You mentioned that mass timber report from Woodworks, and who's done tremendous work over many years. So for an owner developer who has not done mass timber before, they are going, they're considering, where should they start? What's the first step?
Well, that's a good question. So I think and I'll go high level down, right? The first question that I like to ask people is, why? Why are you even thinking about this? Because that really informs the response and the question. So I'll give you some examples. I say, why do you want to do this? And sometimes that's surprising and they're not used to that question. Well, I heard it's cheaper and I heard it's faster, and right there, I know which path I'm going down, right? So, and I've learned that if it is purely a cost play, that they are under the perception that this is a fundamentally cheaper solution because it's faster. And I'm not saying that it isn't, but it's very project specific and location specific, and there's a lot of factors that play into the total cost of ownership. We did a presentation recently with a structural engineer, and we showed up front that the cost comparison to concrete and steel in certain typologies, there was a 14% premium on the mass timber package, apples to apples, okay, just on the material. And then the developer said, yeah, it's too expensive, I can't do it. Well, that's not the end of the story. It's about total cost of ownership. And in the subsequent slides, we pull back that cost because we're saving money. And we did a study with several general contractors and leveraged the speed, the reduction of risk, the fire risk during construction reduction, depending on what we were competing with. And we come back to a place where it's a very, very compelling, cost-effective alternative that gives you a very different product differentiation. So back to your question, it's best, projects are most successful when they are designed from inception for mass timber. So I go back to Woodworks, is identifying your site and learning what can you build there, what's the construction type, what's the fire rating, and having a conversation with the code officials to understand what you can build. Then once you understand what you can build, or maybe you can get some variances, alternative means, methods, what have you, then you go to work designing from a structural perspective. It's really important to start with the structure to get an efficient grid that's optimized and efficient for mass timber manufacturing. And it's even at that point where it's important to talk to some of the manufacturers that are preferably the closest to your site, right? Freight matters. There's a lot of freight in these jobs. And understand that, what is that product? What is the dimension? What are the spans? And then the structural engineer can say, okay, it's a 20 by 25 grid for an office. That's the sweet spot. That's the most efficient. Can we do 30 by 30? Yes, but there's more glulam. Can we thin up the CLT? Yes, potentially, depends on the fire rating. So these fundamental things with code and building construction type and structural engineering then we can get into the design. So that's sort of the first three most fundamental steps as to where to start.
I wish I'd started taking notes faster, because that was a great short course in process. Pete, so I reloaded your presentation, and I've got the last 4 slides here, which starting with the Aureus Earth. So I can run through those quickly for the audience and go to your last slide. There was a question.
Yeah, so,
go ahead.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
There was a question from one of the audience before I switched to this, asking, will the slide deck be available? The answer to that is yes, it will be available to attendees of the webinar. So Pete, I can just flip through these. First the carbon marketplace for buildings, then the Woodworks COVID map.
Yeah, there you go.
Which does kind of track, actually.
I probably should have blown that up a little bit, but that's an interactive map, and it's an important distinction, because you can hover in on those circles, and you can oftentimes be redirected to a website or a Woodworks website or what have you, that will give you a whole bunch of information on the job. It's not a very forward-looking map, because obviously people don't want their projects out there and
right.
Until the time is right. But from a case study perspective and looking back and seeing what precedents have been set and where and who is involved, it's a tremendous resource.
Cool.
And then maybe since we have just a couple minutes, Brian, go up to 22 and let me hit on this sustainable, affordable housing, because this particular project is really indicative of what it takes to have a successful project, and that's a dedicated team that has an owner that's invested in doing this and doing it right, and understanding that there is going to be some learning curve. You have to be willing to do a few of these before you really get good at it. What's cool about this particular project was that it was conceived to be highly replicable. So you can see that we moved the cores and the stair cores out of the center of the building and over to the side, seemingly not a big deal, but the way that impacted the efficiency of the programming for the units was really dramatic. And what you're looking at there are actually timber, cores and stair cores, which help us, obviously resolve our lateral. So the speed with which you can erect a timber core, if you think of those as our maximum panel length at say 50 feet, you just pick that thing up, stand it on its end, and screw 4 of them together, and you've got an incredibly precise. Obviously, it's a little more complicated than that, but for the sake of this discussion, you've got an incredibly precise shaft or core that went up in hours, and subs can be chasing that structure as soon as it's braced and secured. So I see this typology evolving into, as I said, hospitality, student housing, workforce housing, what have you. If we can inspire people to pursue cracking the holy grail of affordable housing, and we can do it with mass timber, well, that's going to create a tectonic shift for everyone, for all stakeholders, and help the factories, which I'll tell you a little insider insight that the factories are struggling to support all these one-off jobs that are entirely different. It takes a lot of personnel, and it's very resource intensive for all the factories. So the more we can offload the front end work on design build shops that are embracing mass timber and are interested in working with us on replicatable housing solutions that can still have an architect's stamp on it, architectural stamp on it, design-wise, then that's that's a way to really advance the industry, because the factories will embrace those projects more readily than the, incredibly complex, time-consuming jobs that maybe we're trying to balance. What are we going to do here? Which one really makes sense from a business perspective? So I think this whole area and the Manta unit I showed you up above that we can keep replicating. You could dedicate one shift to the same production over and over. That's a dream for a factory.
Well, and the thing about the stair towers, for those who get an opportunity to tour the MSU facility, the cores, the stair towers are CLT panels, and they're massive and they're gorgeous. And I hope not too much got covered by drywall, because instead of being the experience of a kind of a cold block concrete interior stair tower, they're amazing towers of wood. So there's that too.
Yeah, and we're trying. This project is going to get built, and it has to get built very quickly because it's public money, it's provincial money, so it's getting rammed through permitting, and everybody's really in support of it. But it was a very conscious effort to leave as much timber exposed throughout the building as is possible. I'm often asked, can we do stair treads in CLT? And it's actually a great trick to use cutoffs from panel production on a stringer as a stair tread, but it's not a good wear surface. So, but I agree, like having a timber shaft with CLT treads on a CLT stringer that's been mitered at both ends and just has a runner down the middle of it, it's extraordinary. And for those of you who've never set foot in a mass timber building, one, I would encourage you to do it, but two, it sounds cheesy and corny, but I'm telling you, it's a life-changing experience. There's just a different feeling when you walk into one of these buildings. And if they've been designed right and the acoustics are right and the building performance is right and all the things that the softer attributes of the system have been brought to bear, it's just a different experience. And watching people's reaction to interacting with a timber building versus a concrete and steel building it's really quite something. It's something to behold, and it's why part of my job, I think, is to inspire the next generation to really embrace mass timber. And so we've got more designers and engineers and builders who are innovating, and it just keeps propagating because the trees can handle it. Those two buildings in Arkansas, I forgot this little soundbite. It's one of my favorites. Given the 19 million acres of trees and 71 tons of wood fiber every 60 seconds in Arkansas, those three buildings that I showed you, the dormitory and the library storage, could be regrown just in the state of Arkansas's timber resources alone in 3 hours. So if you go to like an Ontario wood basket where Element 5 is pulling from, that number would even be greatly reduced, because that wood basket is even more significantly larger than even Arkansas, which is considered pretty significant.
Okay.
So,
go ahead.
No, that's it. I just wanted to squeeze back in that peripheral soundbite off of the fiber growth.
I want to go to some of the questions that have been coming in on the chat. There's a couple of questions in a row here that have to do with really about wood in Michigan. First question is, mass timber presently is only certified for southern yellow pine and Douglas fir, which are not grown in Michigan or Wisconsin. And there is a lot of wood grown here. So talk about that a little bit.
That's not the whole story. So southern yellow pine, yes. Doug fir, yes. But SPF North and SPF South all have PRG 320 certifications through Structurlam, Katerra, Vaughan Brothers, Element 5, and then Nordique has got their own black pine species. It's very reminiscent to SPF North, but it is a different species. It actually has slightly higher value. And so when we did the exercise for Newberry for DNR, I reached out to Delta Potlatch, to the mill up there, Sawyer or Quinn, I forget, just to, from a high level, can I buy an SPF 2x6 from you guys let's not worry about the moisture content and all this other stuff that, you know, that the CLT plants are need. So the quick answer was yes. But this is, again, it's the right question, because the whole conversation starts with the wood basket. So somebody needs to invest in a comprehensive wood basket study of Michigan's timber resources. What's there? What's being cut? Who's cutting it? What are they cutting? What is their appetite to cut different dimensions? What is their appetite to dry it to a 12% moisture content, which nobody likes to do? And it really starts with that fiber. And, you know, I think we went through a similar exercise in Minnesota, and we don't have the white pine here anymore. It's gone. We did a really good job of wiping it out. So we don't have the wood basket. I think Michigan could cobble together enough of the wood basket to support CLT and glulam manufacturing. But as important as that is, the easiest part of this whole process is gluing the boards together. It's the service industry portion of the business model that's really challenging. And, you know, that can be a whole nother series of presentations. You can buy an automated line from Europe and push a button and be snapping out CLT and glulam in a few months. But it's everything that goes before and after that that is really challenging from a business operations perspective, which really comes down to personnel, which are a very small pool of people in North America still that can provide that service that these projects need to be brought to fruition.
Of course, the slam dunk, bad metaphor, but would be not only the wood, but the adhesive, the coatings, all of the pieces that are brought together, all the parts that are brought together come from the forest.
Exactly, and I think the model is a small scale production for starters that's integrated with in an area that what I will just term a wood processing center, where you're not far from the mill for starters, and then you've got CLT and glulam production, but then you've got the shops to do the prefab, the flat pack, the modularization, adding value, adding products, adding more wood products to, and adding value to it. Because at the end of the day, I'm here to tell you, this is my third startup, barring European collaborations. There are so many better ways to make money than gluing boards together. So you really can't ignore from a business perspective, the opportunity to continue to add value to a product, and which is a margin contribution to the business model, to insulate it from the exposure of just gluing wood together and having to charge a lot of money to do it and support a lot of personnel. And then if you don't have that integration or that diversification, and wood does what it's doing right now, it brings stomach bile up for me every time I talk about it, you've got a problem. And so that integration and diversification is really fundamental, I think, to anyone who's considering how to go about this business. But it all goes back to buildings. We got to put up more buildings and prove that there's a real market and it's not a fad, it's not a trend, because nobody's going to put $50 million of capital at risk to glue wood together in the 21st century when there's so many other business models to pursue, unless that group is 100% convinced that this is viable and it's resilient and it's integrated and diversified.
So I'm going to jump around a little bit on the list of the questions that have come in. Terry asks, what do you think it'll take for a CLT manufacturer to locate in Michigan and utilize local material, which could include both softwoods and hardwoods? And you've talked a bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just kind of heard my case for that. It would take, I'll go right back to what I said. You have to understand your wood basket, and you have to understand who you're buying from. And if Deltic Potlatch is the only game in town, that makes any sense, right there, you're in a risky supply chain scenario because unless you can strike a relationship with that mill that says, yeah, we're gonna insulate you from the market fluctuations, and good luck with that conversation because these are commodity dimension lumber manufacturers who sell as a commodity on the open market, and right now they're getting over $1,000 a thousand board feet. Why in God's name would they continue to sell me at 500 a board feet when they're killing it? But that's a very narrow view. The amount of wood coming out of a Deltic potlatch mill going to the CLT and glulam plant, it doesn't move the needle. I mean, literally, it doesn't move the needle. You go build a 30,000 cubic meter CLT plant, there's 424 board feet in a cubic meter. So multiply 20,000 times 424, that's annual output. It's like a couple weeks for these guys. It's like a nuisance order, right? So I think the strategic and broader and smarter and long-term is to pursue that European model, integrate with the mill, and maybe the mill invests in the plant, and the plant can enjoy a decent 30%, gross margin, mind you. That gets whittled down in every single proposal, and enjoy the profits coming out of the CLT plant, which is a much higher value add than cutting sticks, than cutting boards. Sawmills run on razor thin margins that are all about volume. So that's the first conversation. Where it goes from there, how you build the plant, what you're going to build, value-added processing, wood fiber insulation, all these other things are all secondary to the fiber discussion.
So, and again, this is a question I think you've addressed in part, but participant asks, can you speak to the implications of the current lumber market on the cost of mass timber structures and whether anyone sees the market normalizing, and I presume that means reducing from a cost standpoint in the next 18 or stabilizing perhaps, normalizing from a cost standpoint in the next 18 to 30 months?
Yeah, well, that's a popular question. Log prices are at historic lows, so go figure. If someone can explain the algorithm of lumber pricing, I'd be all ears. What I'm being told by my mentors is, their old default saying is, show me today's shortage and I'll show you tomorrow's surplus. So that's sort of the high level response. I do think we are in an anomaly and a perfect storm because of COVID, the unexpected demand, the continuation of construction through COVID, and the immediate restriction of production. The sawmill said, "Oh my God, everything's going to die. We got to neck back," because again, they run on such thin margins. So they're very knee-jerky industry, and so they cut production, they cut logging. We had a surge in consumer purchasing, and construction pretty much forged ahead. So it was the perfect storm. I think it kind of has to normalize because it's not sustainable. But the question is when, and how is that going to impact the current projects that are at risk? So I don't have an answer to that question other than what I just shared.
So, we've had questions about manufacturing in Michigan. A question looking at it in a different way. If Michigan lumber is shipped to Element 5 in Ontario to be fabricated, has the company performed assessments on diesel usage to get the lumber from the fabricator and back to Michigan?
Yeah, so I think I touched on it with Newberry that we did a high level assessment. I went to the mill, I called, I said, can I buy a 2 and better SPF? This is pretty much stud lumber, so it's not ideal, but you can put an awful lot of it in the minor direction of the CLT panel and probably use your higher grade boards for your major direction, the longitudinal, which is, your stronger access.
Right.
You get biaxial strength out of a slab. So again, yes, can I buy a 2x6 SPF in Michigan, ship it to Ontario? Yeah. Is it the same species? Yes, but it's a different distinction because it's south, which is defined by the border. We're using north. I did not look into whether that would warrant a recertification for the PRG 320, which unless somebody was willing to cover that for something so small and so unique, that would probably be a no. The question is, can we use it and not get the certification for a one-off and prove it on a project-specific basis, and then reevaluate it from there. Michigan's not the only state that has come up with this. I mean, I went through this for 5 years in the South. Nobody was going to build anything unless they could use Southern Yellow Pine. And I said, well, then you're not going to build anything. And I said, if you want this to happen, let's build it with what we can build it with, because nothing will advance the industry faster than putting up the buildings. So we imported 150 containers of Norway spruce from Austria. Well, what do you think the local stakeholders in Arkansas did? They about had a seizure and said, why in God's name aren't we doing this here? So we accomplished the overall goal by creating some agitation when 150 containers rolled in from Austria. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. There's a question of please repeat the SPF N and S again. That ran by very rapidly. The SPF N and S.
So my understanding is it's just a north and south distinction that is largely defined by the fact that it's across the border. The north species, SPF, tends to grow a little bit slower and has a slightly higher value from a strength perspective. The SPF South across the border in the US tends to grow just a little bit more quickly and has a slightly lower characteristic engineering value. But what we're really getting at is, does the polyurethane adhesive that everybody is going to, that's formaldehyde free, does that interact any different because of that north-south distinction? From an instinctual understanding, I would say no. It's not going to make one bit of difference. The only difference is the difference in the value. So does that impact the span table and the characteristics of the product? And it will to a certain degree. But again, when you're engineering it into a larger element, that differentiation I don't think is going to be significant. So the question just becomes, are we allowed to substitute SPF South and not have to redo the PRG 320 and meet it? Or do we have to do the testing and all that and get recertified?
Sure. I think a related question, perhaps related. Nordique's product of black spruce is mainly 2x4. Doesn't that fit our Michigan SPF tree size? Does that alter the wood basket?
Yeah, it's just, if you can use a wider piece and handle less boards, it's less onerous. But, using small diameter trees, I think, is a very important part of this discussion. But, visually, aesthetically, it's more difficult to get to that visual grade that everybody wants when you're using a 2x4. Because your seams are so pronounced. And Element 5, fortunately, invested in edge gluing technology, giving them what I think is the first true European visual grade panel in North America. And in my humble opinion, that has not been available because nobody's edge gluing. So the 2x4 coupled with an edge gluing technology and side pressure could, given a high quality fiber, I think could yield an exceptionally good looking and strong product for sure.
And by the way, earlier on, Rich Colby of Michigan State University did note on the chat that Michigan State University stairwells will not be covered with drywall. Yay. They went with 2 additional CLT layers to meet the burn times of code rather than drywall.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we did 2-hour testing on that ADM vertical expansion I showed you in the DC slide. In the DC Capital Riverfront District, we did a 2-hour 5-ply glulam and CLT assembly testing down in San Antonio, and we hit the 2-hour. But that's it. We hit the 2 and we were good. If you need 3, you either got to go beefier and give it that sacrificial to amp up the charring, or you just got to cover it. But that's good to know. I got to add that. I didn't know that. I haven't had a chance to go over there yet and see it.
Okay, so Sarah asks a question that I'm going to read in exactly because we're now out of my wheelhouse. Hemlock is in the quote subspecies ANSI rules. So are you talking quote PRG-320 or is it CRG? Please pronounce it again. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we're talking about 2 different things. There's a APA, American Plywood Association, which is the governing body for engineered wood products. It really ought to be called something other than plywood, but it is what it is. Came up with the manufacturing standards for cross-laminated timber, and that is called PRG, Peter Roger Giraffe 320. So yeah, the hemlock reference, that's just a different reference to a different species. It's not connected to what I'm describing as the manufacturing standard. If we were going to use hemlock, we would be, spelling that out as the species and then certifying to that species, which is largely determined by working with the adhesive manufacturer, who has to do all the the testing and modeling, and then we do the production, and then the destructive testing happens. But the PRG 320 is the manufacturing standard that you see when you publish specifications on a job, and we read it. Of course, it always says product needs to meet PRG 320.
One last question. We've gone through all the questions from the audience. Just one last one as a bit of a segue toward the next session, which will be on hardwoods in Michigan. Do you see, or are you seeing, case studies or examples of hardwood use in architectural mass timber structure?
Well, it seems like there's been a lot of talk, and it sort of seems to come and go in waves. I don't ever see I could see a hybrid, okay? And I actually played around a little bit with this with Southern Pine because, as it turns out, in Arkansas, only like 35% of the trees are Southern Pine. The rest tend to be hardwoods, which was an interesting distinction. So I think it's a hybrid, and I think it to create a different visual grade on the interior. I can't see the value proposition of a full-blown hardwood CLT panel. So I think it's a hybrid where that 5th ply or that 3rd ply or that 7th ply is a visual in hardwood that just delivers an entirely different and distinct visual aesthetic. And can it be done? Of course. It's just a matter of, does it work? And when you have dissimilar species, now you only got one glue in there, and it's got to hit the SPF and the hardwood. And obviously, as you might imagine, hardwood is going to be a little bit more resistant to taking up the adhesive versus the softwood. So does that change your pressure? Does it change your planing protocol? Does it change the adhesive? And do you have to come up with a totally unique hybrid adhesive? So there's a lot of considerations in doing that.
Pete, this has been just fascinating, informative, really good stuff. We're at the end of our time. And out of respect for the commitments we know that our participants have, we're going to wrap it up with this. But again, Thank you, Pete. And please, I don't know if you have a 1 minute, thanks. I mean, we put your contact information, the information will be up there on the website. We have a session coming up June 3rd on hardwoods for mass timber, opportunities and challenges. And then in August, where's tall mass timber going? And in September, affordable housing. So this is part of a series. So Pete, I don't know, any last counsel?
Well, first of all, make sure I get invited to all three of the ones you just rattled off.
Okay.
I'd be very interested in hearing those. I think you can see that there are full-blown presentations that can be pulled out of virtually every slide that we just shared today. And you just hit on three really important ones. So I'd love to participate as a listener and throw some good zinger questions at those guys.
Good.
No, I just want to reinforce and amplify to everyone that I'm absolutely available. I am a consultant. I am full-time for Element 5, but I feel it's really important to just make myself accessible and available to any of the stakeholders out there. I'm pretty resourceful. If I don't know the answer, I can find it. And I'm just genuinely interested in helping advance the industry in my own small way. So please just don't hesitate to reach out to me to connect on any of these peripheral or tangential topics. And thanks, Brian, and thanks, Julie, for orchestrating this. This has been perfect, and we're exactly at an hour, which is thoroughly impressive. So that's all I got to say.
Well, thank you all, and thank you all to our audience, and thank you in large part for putting up with some technology surprises that just came our way a few minutes before noon. And so we're all learning in this world. So thank you all again, and we hope we'll see you next month, and we hope you'll stay connected with NIFP and each other in the future. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.